concept Teresa and I were working on today is to be able to predict social change, such as what's been going on in Egypt recently with all the revolutions and around the Arab world, and also to be able to accurately engage in social engineering to cause or prevent such events. And the focus is on how Dramatica might allow us to do this. The function is that if we look at the roots of social change, for example, the fact that we've now in the United States elected the first black president, you can look at the media and see where stories like Deep Impact, I think it was called, was the meteor striking the Earth, and it was one of the first times that we saw a black president being portrayed in a major motion picture. And that had Morgan Freeman representing that president, who also had a lot of credibility, and because of the way he was portrayed, it put a positive spin on the potential of a black president. In addition, in the program 24 about Jack, the agent who is got 24 hours that become the entire series, that series had the black president, who also was portrayed as being very trustworthy, very capable, and very positive to have had him, because only through that particular character was Jack able to solve the terrorist threat that lasted over the 24 episodes, each one being 1 hour. In other areas, we've also seen such things, like in West Wing, there is the James Olmos character who became a candidate for the Supreme Court that preceded us, having the first Hispanic nominee who was selected to be on the Supreme Court, and that was preceded by the West Wing, and the fact that he was a very positive character with which everyone could identify, and made us feel good to imagine that we had such a personage on our Supreme Court who would do such a good job for us. So then real life is a little more enabled for people to accept that. From this, in the conversation, we began to realize that you could look to the patterns of what's going on several years in advance in society, and follow them and see what the result might be in the future. In fact, you can look at such things as what's already happened in terms of the gay community being accepted to a almost complete extent, and the whole concept of gay marriage and how that's currently changing in the news, and find the stories and the songs. We had talked about songs and things having to do with gender identity, such as going all the way back with treating it lightly, like in Tootsie, but there are tender moments where Dustin Hoffman's character comes to discover his softer side through it. And things like The Prince of Tides, which one questions the rough and tumble identity that one has had. Then there's the bleeding edge, like The Crying Game, where one must confront it directly. And also comedic stories like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and Victor Victoria, where it's treated in a humorous manner. That humorous manner is different than what you saw with Milton Berle, Uncle Milty, when he used to dress up in drag. That was not the kind of humor that led one to question one's identity, but simply to make fun of the fact that a guy was getting dressed up as a woman and how hilarious that was. When it progressed later into such things as Victor Victoria, there's always a serious side mixed in with the comedy. There is some human truth or some identity issues which come into question as a result of the humor, and that's at a much higher level of consideration, a much more serious level of consideration, quite literally, than just simply the burlesque approach to things. So it's possible that when you map these things out, and then you see them moving into public service announcements and an editorial bias to talk about discrimination or prejudice as being the norm, that these kinds of activities against such people as these would be considered discrimination or considered to be wrong. Well, that is a bias. It's what I consider positive bias, but it's still a bias, and when that starts making its way into the normal presentation of news and information, then you begin to see that it has almost come to the point where it's accepted as a new way of thinking in society, which leads us to this next concept. That concept being the notion of the story mind. The story mind is, in a story, the mind of the story itself, in which the characters represent facets of that mind. This works at many different levels, and we call this fractal psychology, so that you can look at the societal mind, and you can say that all of the entertainments and informational programs that are going on are representative of the subconscious alteration of thoughts, the processes of thinking that lead the societal mind to change its mind to adopt a new attitude, the same way a main character would adopt a new attitude in a story. It requires a whole story to get there. It requires a whole movement through social change by having one thought after another in the society's subconscious, in the society's mind, and each thought might be another book, another television series, another song, like Lola or something of that nature, Get Back by the Beatles, which we're dealing with gender identity, for example. So all of these come together to soften the way, as it were, toward eventually moving up to the next level of consideration. Now, what is that next level? Well, in most cases, humor is the first level that we move to because we find it easy to laugh at things, and it's only a small step to go from laughing at to laughing with. If we begin to identify with the character that is funny, then we start to laugh with them instead of at them, and we've already started to identify with the character who may be doing something that we societally consider taboo. The moment that happens through identification, we have softened our position on it slightly as a society, in the society's mind. It's a step closer to making a change. Now, if we look at the way these changes happen, they have to come full circle. They have to go once around where you deal with it in a burlesque style of humor, and then you end up with a more sophisticated humor that has the touching human side. Then you move out of humor entirely until you get into maybe something dramatic. Then maybe it's done for just entertainment value because it's accepted to be that way, such as when Bill Cosby and Robert Culp starred as equals on I Spy. That was one of the early things that set the notion of equality for a black person and a white person to be friends. You dealt with it more dramatically with Tony Curtis and Sidney Poitier in The Defiant Ones, where they were two convicts chained together and had to be together. That was one level of consideration, and it focused on those issues. But when it was carried to the next level, in which it was matter of fact and never directly addressed in I Spy with Robert Culp and Bill Cosby, then it had been like an act break, where we completed the first act of exploration in the story mind of society, the society's mind, and moved on to the next act. Now, an act break, you can feel it when it breaks from one act to another. You get a feeling that we've completed looking at something from a particular standpoint or in regard to certain issues, and now we're ready to move and go on to the next step or the next phase, or to look at things from a whole new perspective, depending on the kind of story. That sense of an act break is what happens when we move from a level of treating it like in The Defiant Ones in a very dramatic way, and then moving into a matter-of-fact way like in I Spy. Well, these act breaks start to tie in the structure, and yet at the same time, these societal changes that are going on at the subconscious of the society's mind, all of those are more of a storytelling level. Which brings us back to the notion that Chris had when he invented the chart of the modes of expression in Dramatica. He discovered that there are 4 modes of expression by which we could present a structure in storytelling, and those modes were drama, comedy, entertainment, and information. Each one is a different style, and he was able to create a chart by putting those 4 modes along one side of the chart, and along the top putting universe, physics, mind, and psychology, the 4 classes of the Dramatica structure, and create a grid in which structure met storytelling. So, for example, you could look at the comedy line, which would go all the way across, and look under universe, which would be on the top column. So you look at the comedy row, and you look at universe, and you say comedy in universe equals a situation comedy. But the next line to universe would be physics. So then you would have a physical comedy. And then you would have psychology, which would be a comedy of errors because you're not thinking right about things. And finally, in the last one, which is mind, it would be a comedy of errors, a comedy of manners, a comedy of manners where someone has an attitude like someone who's stuck up or someone who considers himself high society or better than someone else, and it makes it funny. An attitude, a fixed attitude, comedy of manners. So comedy of manners, comedy of errors, physical comedy, situation comedy. Then you can move down to drama, and you can look at what happens when you have a situational drama, or an action drama, or an entertaining drama, and so on. And you can do that with information, and you can also do it with entertainment. He was able then to take a bunch of movies, well-known ones, and find clips that exemplified the fact that the entire movie felt like that particular mode of expression matched with that particular structural standpoint. Well, if we were to do this, it gives you a general sense of the attitudes that may be in society and how they're shifting over time. But one thing I contributed was to look at that and say, well, we actually have those kinds of shifts going on within a story. Although overall it may look like a situation comedy, there also may be some drama in it. There also may be some entertainment or some information. In fact, if you look at the drama, which would be Citizen Kane, it begins with a documentary which shows information about the construction of Xanadu, the equivalent of William Randolph's Hearst Castle. In any event, you end up moving through all of those modes of expression in some stories. In others, they stick within one mode. Now, finally, if you move also from universe to physics to mind and psychology, you can see that these things, all four of those lines, are going to be in every single story, because one will be the main character, one will be the obstacle or influence character, one will be the overall story, one will be the subjective story. So all four of those lines are going to be there, and at the same time, they're going to be moving from comedy to drama to entertainment and to information. And how they can move, they can't jump over from everyone to every other mode of expression, because that's too far for the emotions of the audience or the readers to follow. Instead, you have to go through the in-betweens, just like you have to go through the 7 stages of grief in order. You can't skip any steps. And even though it's discredited, Freud's psychosexual stages were on the right track insofar as saying that there were certain stages one could go through, and you had to go through them in order, and you could get stuck along the way. So that somebody might be anal, for example. This was the progression. That concept of progression is valid, even though Freud may be discredited. What it comes down to is that if we use the Dramatica story structure, its engine, to be able to look at and map the structural part of what we see in society as it goes through topics such as learning, understanding, doing, and obtaining, the 4 types that are underneath the physics class, if we monitor the pathway we're taking through those, and we combine it with the modes of expression to see which ones are dealt with in which mode, we can determine if they're all going through the same mode of expression. Then it's not near a flashpoint or a point of change in which the societal mind alters its point of view. Rather, it's going to be moving through those all at one level of a mode of expression, and it'll have to go through the whole story and come all the way back again before it can do another mode of expression. But if we've seen something move through all 4 modes of expression historically, as we have mapped it out, and we see that it's gone through all 4 modes of expression and all 4 of the elements in the structure, then it's gone completely, not just once around the helix with the structure, but it's gone once around the helix 4 times for the 4 modes of expression, and then both the intellect and the passion of society's mind have been completely satisfied. The nature of the emotional side of the consideration and the logical side of the consideration have both been completed. When you're reaching that final stage of having completed all 4 of the structural wraparounds in regard to the modes of expression, and you complete all 4 modes of expression, each one requiring going around the structure once, then you're reaching a flashpoint or a point of change. And therefore, by looking over society and looking at the art forms and the cultural expressions and the books and the movies and the stage plays and the songs, chants that are popular in the Muslim world, you can take that information and clearly predict when that flashpoint is going to come. Dramatica, being used that way, with this degree of familiarity and this additional approach to the theory to combine the storytelling with the story structure, allows it to be able to predict the social times of revolution and the social times of evolution. Because there's one other component that Chris also created, which is very handy, where he was able to take the patterns we saw in plotting time flow over the fixed chart of Dramatica. Remember, the Dramatica chart really moves and twists and turns like a Rubik's Cube, and when it does, it winds up dramatic potentials. Well, if you figured out what dramatic potential you have, and then you unwind it back to the unbiased position, to the neutral position, but leave those things plotted on it, you can see that they form different patterns in each quad. Sometimes they form a C or a U shape, depending on which direction you have it in a quad. Other times they can form an N or a Z pattern in different directions. That way, or that way, or that way. From there. Anyway, so you also have hairpins like this that can move along a quad. When you do, you're going to be moving between states and processes and between internal and external. And depending on how that shift goes, if you end up with a double bump where you go from internal to external and also from state to process, it's going to create the effect of a revolution, a moment of precipitation, a hard bump, as it were, in the progress of the story. There may be one that strikes and then needs to strike again, because sometimes you have double hard bumps, one at the beginning, one near the end. Other times you have a single hard bump in the middle. And if you have the hard bumps at either end, it might be something like Tiananmen Square, which later on in the story will come back and have another revolution that will then be successful later on, because the first one was just the first part of the story. Other times you can have a smooth transition, where it just goes from either internal to external, but it stays in states or processes, or it goes from state to process, but stays all in internal or external. All of those are going to occur in every story. But by mapping out the ones that are going to be at the precipitous point when the entire structure has gone through all four evolutions and all four modes of expression have been explored, then that completes the emotional and the intellectual journey. And by looking at whether they were hard bumps or soft bumps along the way, this will then allow us to be able to predict whether it's going to be an evolution or a revolution when it finally comes to society's mind changing its attitude or its outlook after the complete progression of both the modes of expression and the structure. Finally, this also allows us to then be able to create social engineering, where we're not just operating at the structural level, but also finally have access into the storytelling level as well, and realize that we must make these circuits of all four modes of expression for all four times around the circuit of the structure. And therefore, by determining this and figuring out where we're going to cross from states and processes and internals to externals, we can determine whether we're going to create an evolutionary social change or a revolutionary social change. It is predictable, and it can be wholly developed. Add to that the idea of looking at every story form as a snapshot of the way society is now, and though you can use it to predict how it would all play out if there was no chaos and it was a closed system, by taking a series of snapshots, each one being like a movie frame, you can still have your eyes on the goal of how you want to engineer society to be, or where you think it's going to go. And then as the unexpected occurs, that's the next movie frame. And as the movie frames continue, each one will be accurate in the near future by itself, but taking them collectively, you can see how there is a pattern beginning to form, or a wave pattern beginning to form, as we move through these movie frames, and see whether we're staying within a range on track of where we're going, or whether we have to apply a course correction because we're slowly moving off course and have to put pressure in the other direction to bring it to the point we want to be at. Or, if that would be for social engineering, or to be able to predict where it's going to end up as it continues to curve if we're just leaving it alone and observing it in social prediction. And just as a side note, that also is the technology that would allow us to combine the Dramatica approach of dealing with the structure and the story mind approach of dealing with the passionate creation of ideas, the two of them could be connected by such a usage, which at first requires an expert level understanding of Dramatica to apply, later on could be incorporated in the same kind of engine that we use in Dramatica, but an engine for the modes of expression, which would be the basis of a passionate story engine, a story engine based on the progression of emotions, which could then later lead to being able to plot out how the audience or reader is going to feel at any scene or any given place in the story, and also lead to being able to predict that and to cause it to happen. Therefore, it could also be used in social engineering using fractal psychology to both predict and also to control not only what was going to happen, but also how people would feel about it. That's the name of that tune. That's the end of that story. And we're back on the road. We came back so I could record this because it was just too good to miss, this conversation and information we had. And now that it's been documented, I'll just verify that we've got it recorded, and then we can finally make our trip this Sunday afternoon. The date is February, what is it, the 27th? February 27th, Sunday, 2011.